You have come here with a question that has burned in the soul of many who have carried the burden of sensitivity. A question that haunts the heart of the one who gives yet receives no gratitude, who heals yet feels despised, who lifts another only to find themselves rejected. Why is it that the empath who extends a hand in help often feels the sting of hatred from those they have only sought to heal? It seems paradoxical at first, almost cruel, as if the universe itself turns its back on the giver. Yet when we look beneath the surface with the lens of depth psychology, we find that this mystery is woven into the very architecture of the human psyche, into the primordial drama of shadow and light, into the archetypal conflict that has always played out between the conscious and the unconscious. Let us not imagine that the hatred directed toward the empath is a simple matter of misunderstanding or ingratitude. No, it emerges from a much deeper root, a subterranean source in the unconscious. When you as an empath extend your energy to heal another, you are not merely offering kindness. You are in truth touching the invisible wounds that the other has hidden, sometimes even from themselves. And in doing so, you bring them face to face with the contents of their shadow. The shadow is not a poetic metaphor. It is a psychic reality, a repository of everything the conscious ego has rejected, denied, or repressed. It is composed of unlived desires, buried traumas, disowned aggressions, and the primitive instincts that civilization has pressed down into darkness. To encounter one's shadow is to be unsettled, to feel the tremors of one's own denied truth rising from depths that were meant to remain sealed. But the shadow is not only negative. This is a crucial misunderstanding. The shadow also contains gold, contains gifts that were rejected because they threatened the persona we constructed to survive. The child who was told they were too sensitive learned to shadow their empathy. The one who was punished for their anger learned to shadow their healthy aggression. The one who was mocked for their joy learned to shadow their exuberance. The shadow contains both the monster and the treasure, both the wound and the unrealized potential. When the empath mirrors another's shadow, they are reflecting back not only what is dark and rejected, but also what is powerful and unlived. This is why the response can be so violent. You are not only showing them their shame, you are showing them their magnificence. And for someone who has spent their entire life making themselves small, being confronted with their own largeness can be more terrifying than being confronted with their darkness. The empath, by their very nature, acts as a mirror. This mirror is not the flattering kind that shows the mask, the persona, the socially acceptable self. Instead, it reflects back the unacknowledged darkness. When you stand before someone in pain and offer your energy, they sense, often unconsciously, that you see more of them than they wish revealed. They sense, perhaps in a terrifying way, that their carefully constructed mask cannot withstand your gaze. And rather than thank you, they may hate you. For you have become the unwelcome reminder of what they have long buried. Consider the wounded healer archetype that appears across cultures and throughout history. In myth, it is often the shaman, the prophet, or the mystic who bears the gift of sight, but also the burden of rejection. The archetypal healer does not only soothe wounds, they reveal them. To reveal is to unsettle. To unsettle is to provoke. The healer who walks into the village carrying truth is not always welcomed with gratitude. More often, they are met with suspicion, with resistance, with the rage of those who would prefer their illusions remain intact. In the work of depth psychology, this paradox unfolds repeatedly. Those who come seeking help, sometimes in moments of progress, turn their hostility against the very one who has guided them closer to truth. Why? Because they have been brought too close to the abyss of their own shadow, and rather than embrace it, they project their rage outward. It is not the helper who is hated, but what the helper has awakened within them. The empath in daily life suffers this same fate, only without the safety of a therapeutic container. You offer kindness, yet you stir the unconscious defenses of those around you. You extend love, yet you awaken the very demons they have spent lifetimes trying to escape. And so the hatred comes not because you have failed, but because you have succeeded in touching what was meant to remain untouched. Before we descend further into this mystery, if this resonates with your soul's journey, please hit that like button and share for more transformational content. Your support helps this message reach other souls who need to understand why they suffer for their gift. You may ask, why is this particularly true for empaths? Why is the empath such a lightning rod for hatred even when they only intend good? It is because the empath does not merely act with external gestures. They vibrate with an interior resonance that penetrates the psychic boundaries of others. They feel into the wounds sometimes more deeply than the wounded themselves dare to feel. And this depth of contact dissolves the barriers that the ego has so carefully erected. Imagine the psyche as a fortress. Most people defend this fortress with walls of pride, denial, and rationalization. The gates are guarded by justifications, by stories that explain away pain, by narratives that maintain the illusion of control. Yet when the empath arrives, their very presence opens the gate. Not forcefully, but through a kind of psychic osmosis. The empath's openness creates a field in which the other's defenses begin to weaken, begin to crack. And once the gate is opened, the unconscious erupts like a flood. The one who feels this eruption may then turn and hate the very person who opened the door. For it was easier to blame the intruder than to face the chaos within. This is not conscious. This is not a deliberate cruelty. It is the automatic defense mechanism of a psyche that has been disturbed from its slumber. The Carl Jung empath becomes in this moment the target of everything that has been held back, everything that has been denied, everything that now demands to be seen. It is also important to understand projection. The unconscious cannot tolerate being seen directly, so it projects its contents outward, casting them upon those nearby. The empath, by entering into a relationship with another's psychic field, becomes the canvas upon which this projection is painted. Thus, the hatred that you feel directed toward you is not truly yours. It is a shadow image, a displaced hostility, a reflection of the inner war raging within the other. The tragedy is that the empath, being sensitive, often internalizes this hatred, mistaking it as their own fault, as though they had somehow failed. But in truth, it is not the empath who is hated. It is the mirror they hold. When you can grasp this, you will suffer less. You will see that the hatred is not about you, but about the archetypal energies that swirl between souls, about the unconscious material that seeks expression through whatever vessel is available. Dreams often reveal this dynamic with striking clarity. There is the dream of the luminous figure offering water to one who is thirsty. In the dream, the dreamer drinks, but then becomes enraged and smashes the vessel. When we unpack such a dream, it becomes clear that the luminous figure symbolizes the healing presence that the dreamer both craves as and resists. The water is life-giving, but it also awakens thirsts that have long been denied. To accept the gift means admitting emptiness, admitting dependency, and the rage that follows is a defense against this vulnerability. The empath in waking life often plays the role of that luminous figure, offering water only to be met with violence. This is not accidental. It is archetypal. For the psyche is structured in such a way that every light awakens its corresponding shadow. Every healer awakens resistance. Every act of love evokes the fear of loss. To understand this is to begin to free oneself from the personal sting of rejection. It is not you they hate. It is the force of unconscious truth that your presence evokes. But we must also recognize that the empath is not innocent of this dynamic. Often unconsciously, the empath is drawn into helping others because they too are in search of healing. They see in others the wounds they have not fully integrated within themselves. In this sense, the empath's gift can also be their own shadow in disguise. To heal others may be a way of avoiding their own suffering, a way of bypassing the inner work that demands to be done. Thus, when hatred comes, it cuts doubly deep. It not only wounds the empath externally, but it exposes the fragility of their own inner foundation. The empath may realize in that painful moment that their giving was not as pure as they believed, that beneath the desire to help was also a need to be needed, a hunger for validation, a desperate hope that by healing others, they might finally heal themselves. This recognition is devastating, but it is also necessary. For only through such recognition can the empath begin the true work of individuation. The way forward, then, is not to abandon the gift, but to deepen the understanding of it. The empath must learn that to heal does not mean to save, that to love does not mean to be loved in return, and that the hatred they encounter is not a verdict upon their worth, but a symptom of the archetypal drama unfolding. When you hold a mirror, some will look and be grateful. Others will smash it to pieces. But the mirror remains true. There is a profound difference between the empath who gives unconsciously and the one who gives with awareness. The unconscious empath operates from a place of compulsion, driven by forces they do not understand. They find themselves drawn again and again to people who cannot receive their gift, to situations that replicate the original wound of not being seen or valued. They mistake this repetition for fate, for bad luck, for some fundamental flaw in their own being. But it is none of these things. It is the psyche's attempt to resolve what has never been resolved, to heal what has never been healed, to finally receive the love that was withheld in the beginning. The problem is that the psyche seeks this resolution in the outer world through others, when the true resolution can only happen within. No amount of giving to others can fill the void left by a parent who could not see you, by a family that required you to be small, by a world that punished your sensitivity. Now we must speak of the archetypal figure of the scapegoat, for this is often the role unconsciously assigned to the empath. In ancient rituals, the scapegoat carried the sins, the darkness, the collective shame of the community, and was driven out into the wilderness. This was not merely a cultural practice, but a psychic necessity. For the human psyche cannot bear to hold the full weight of its shadow without finding an external vessel onto which it can be cast. And who is more suited to receive this projection than the one who has already revealed in openness to carry the pain of others? Thus the empath becomes the unwilling scapegoat, carrying not only their own wounds, but the disowned fragments of those they encounter. To be scapegoated is to feel unjustly accused, to be burdened with guilt that is not yours, to feel hatred from those you have only sought to relieve. Yet this phenomenon must be understood as an archetypal process. It is not random, nor is it solely personal. It is the old drama repeating itself in modern guise, enacted in relationships, families, workplaces, and friendships. The empath becomes the sacrificial vessel through which others attempt to purify themselves of the darkness they cannot bear to integrate. Understanding Jung on empaths and projection reveals that this dynamic is as old as human consciousness itself, embedded in the collective patterns that govern our relationships. In families, you often see one child who becomes the carrier of all that the family cannot acknowledge. This child feels everything, sees everything, absorbs the unspoken tensions and unexpressed grief. They become the identified patient, the problem child, the one who must be fixed. Yet in truth, they are simply the ones sensitive enough to register what everyone else has learned to ignore. They are the symptom bearer for the collective family shadow. The same pattern repeats in friendships, in workplaces, in communities. The empath becomes the one onto whom all dysfunction is projected. They are blamed for being too sensitive, too emotional, too intense. Yet what is really happening is that their presence is making visible what others have worked hard to keep invisible. They are the canary in the coal mine, registering toxicity that others have learned to tolerate. And for this, they are often cast out. What then is to be done? Shall the empath refuse this role, harden their heart, close their gift, and retreat into the safety of indifference? Some do. Some, having been burned too many times by the fire of projection, withdraw their light and cease to offer it. But in doing so, they deny a fundamental aspect of their soul. Others continue to give without awareness, endlessly absorbing hatred until they are crushed under the weight of what is not theirs. Neither path is sufficient. The task of individuation requires a third way. To continue to carry the gift, but with consciousness, with boundaries, with the knowledge that what is projected upon you does not belong to you. This requires a spiritual maturity, a psychological depth, a capacity to distinguish between your essence and the images cast upon you. Without this discernment, the empath remains vulnerable to confusion, internalizing the hostility of others, as if it were a verdict upon their very being. With discernment, however, the empath can stand like the tree that endures the storm, rooted, grounded, unmoved by the winds of projection. The leaves may be torn, the branches may be shaken, but the essence remains. This is not a metaphor for emotional numbness or defensive hardening. It is an image of centered strength, of being so rooted in the self that the projections of others pass through you without taking root, without defining who you are. But let us look more deeply into why those who are helped can respond with hatred. One dimension is envy. To be helped is to acknowledge need. To acknowledge need is to feel small, and the ego, which thrives on the illusion of self-sufficiency, resents this exposure. The empath, by offering help, may inadvertently wound the pride of the other. They feel in the depths of their soul exposed, as incomplete, as vulnerable, as one who cannot exist without another's aid. And rather than feel gratitude, they may mask this vulnerability with aggression. They hate not because they were harmed, but because they were made aware of their fragility. This is the wound of pride, and it runs deeper than most care to admit. For in our culture, dependency is often equated with weakness, and to accept help is to admit that one has failed at the paramount task of being strong, being independent, being enough. There is also the archetype of the betrayer to consider, the one who follows the healer who receives the teaching yet who betrays with a kiss. Why does this happen? Because to walk in the presence of light is to feel the unbearable contrast with one's own darkness. It is easier to destroy the light than to allow it to reveal the hidden shadows. This archetype repeats itself endlessly in human relationships. The empath gives, but the one who receives may betray, may lash out, may reject, not because the gift was false, but because the gift was too true. In dreams, this manifests as the image of the benevolent figure turning suddenly into the enemy. The dreamer who sought comfort finds terror in the very one who offered it. This duality is not accidental. It reveals the ambivalence of the unconscious toward healing. We long for wholeness, yet we resist the dissolution of our defenses. We crave love, yet we fear its exposure of our emptiness. The empath embodying love becomes both desired and despised, adored and rejected, healer and enemy. The hatred that empaths feel from others is not always conscious. Often it is subtle. A withdrawal of affection, a coldness, a criticism that cuts deeper than expected. Yet beneath these gestures lies the same archetypal dynamic. The other senses often without words that you carry something dangerous, the power to unveil, and so they protect themselves with hostility. To recognize this pattern is not to excuse cruelty, but to understand it, and thereby to be freed from the illusion that it is your fault. Now we must speak of the archetypal forces that govern the relationship between helper and helped. There is the dynamic of victim and rescuer, a pattern that the Carl Jung empath often finds themselves caught within. The empath is drawn often unconsciously to the victim, to the one who suffers, who cries out silently for help. This is not accidental. It is archetypal magnetism, a psychic pull that operates beneath the level of conscious choice. But within the victim lies not only pain, but also resentment. To be seen as a victim is humiliating to the ego. The one who is rescued may feel gratitude, yes, but alongside it burns a hidden rage. Rage at their dependency. Rage at the mirror that reveals their weakness. Rage that they were not strong enough to stand without another's aid. Thus, the rescuer awakens in the victim not only gratitude, but hostility. This hostility is intensified when we remember that every victim carries within them a hidden tyrant. The polarity of victim and tyrant are two sides of the same archetype. When you heal the victim, you may also awaken the tyrant, the shadow force that resents your power and seeks to strike you down. This is why the empath is often blindsided. They expect the victim's gratitude, but instead, they awaken the tyrant's vengeance. In clinical work, this archetype emerges repeatedly. A person arrives in despair, pleading for help, only to turn with accusation when they are brought closer to truth. This is not personal. It is the archetypal pattern of victim and rescuer unfolding. If the empath can grasp this, they will suffer less. They will see that the hatred is not about them, but about the archetypal energies at play. Consider a common scenario. An empath befriends someone in crisis, offering endless support, listening for hours, providing resources and guidance. Slowly, the person in crisis begins to improve. They find their footing, regain their strength, and then, inexplicably, they begin to withdraw from the empath. They become cold, critical, even hostile. The empath is devastated. But I helped you, they think. I was there when no one else was. What has happened? The person in crisis and their newfound strength cannot bear to be reminded of their former weakness. The empath's presence is a constant reminder of who they were at their lowest point. And so they must push the empath away, must rewrite the narrative, must sometimes even convince themselves that the empath was manipulative or had ulterior motives. This allows them to maintain their new identity as strong, independent, self-sufficient. The empath becomes the scapegoat for their own disowned vulnerability. Another archetype that reveals itself here is that of the trickster. The trickster is the one who disrupts, who unsettles, who reveals the hidden contradictions of life. In many ways, the empath unwittingly embodies the trickster. For by offering help, they overturn the illusions of autonomy and pride that others cling to. To be helped is to admit that one is not self-sufficient. And this is a trick the ego resists with all its might. Thus, the empath, without intending it, plays the role of the trickster who unmasks the ego's lie. And the ego, humiliated, responds with hostility. This is the dance of shadow and light, of truth and illusion, of the conscious ego defending itself against the eruption of the unconscious. We must also speak of anima and animus, those inner figures of the psyche that shape our relationships with others. The empath often constellates these figures in the unconscious of those they encounter. A man may project his anima upon a female empath, feeling both drawn to her sensitivity and enraged by the vulnerability she evokes within him. A woman may project her animus upon a male empath, experiencing his care as both protective and intrusive, both desired and despised. These projections are rarely conscious. They emerge as inexplicable emotions, sudden irritation, irrational hostility directed toward the empath. Yet in truth, what is hated is not the empath themselves, but the inner figure they have awakened. Here lies the crux of the mystery. The empath becomes the stage upon which the other's unconscious drama is enacted. They become the carrier of projections and the vessel of archetypes, the mirror of shadow. And because of this, they receive not only love, but hatred, not only gratitude, but betrayal. To live as an empath is to be caught in the cross-currents of archetypal energies far larger than the personal ego can comprehend. This is not a comfortable position. It is a position of vulnerability, of exposure, of being subject to forces that most people never consciously encounter. But now, we must turn inward. For it is not enough to analyze the other. The empath must also confront their own unconscious. Why do they help? Why do they give endlessly even to those who despise them? Often, it is because they seek unconsciously to heal their own wound. They believe that by healing others, they will finally be worthy of love, finally be safe from rejection. But this is a deception, a trick of the psyche. For no amount of giving can fill the void that has not been faced within oneself. The hatred of others then becomes a brutal teacher, forcing the empath to recognize that their worth cannot be established through sacrifice alone. The wounded healer archetype reminds us that those who carry the gift of healing must first attend to their own wounds, must first integrate their own shadow before they can truly offer their gift without unconscious entanglement. In alchemical texts, we find the image of the wounded healer as the one who carries both the poison and the cure. The empath must accept this paradox within themselves. They carry love, but also the wound of being unloved. They offer healing, but they also need healing. When they deny this and attempt to heal only others, they are bound to encounter hatred. For the psyche resists being used as the unconscious vessel for another's redemption. But when the empath turns inward, when they face their own shadow, when they acknowledge their own need and integrate it, then their giving becomes pure, no longer bound by unconscious compulsion, no longer driven by the need to prove their worth, no longer seeking in others the healing they have not given themselves. This is the alchemical transformation, the turning of lead into gold, the movement from wounded helper to individuated healer. There is a dream that appears often in the journey of the empath. They dream of standing at the edge of a great ocean, watching as people drown in the waves. One by one, they dive in to save them, pulling bodies to shore. But each time they turn back, more are drowning. The empath becomes exhausted, their own breath failing, yet they cannot stop. They dive again and again until they themselves begin to sink beneath the surface. And then, in the dream, they hear a voice. You cannot save them all, but you can stop drowning yourself. This dream reveals a profound truth. The empath's first responsibility is to their own wholeness, not out of selfishness, but out of necessity. For the one who is drowning cannot save another from drowning. The one who has not found their own ground cannot offer stable ground to another. This is not about abandoning compassion. It is about understanding that true compassion begins with self-compassion, that true healing begins with self-healing. The wounded healer archetype teaches us that the wound itself becomes the source of healing power, but only after it has been consciously integrated. The unintegrated wound leads to unconscious helping that perpetuates suffering. The integrated wound becomes wisdom, becomes depth, becomes the very ground from which authentic healing flows. We must also speak of boundaries. The empath often suffers because they do not recognize where they end and another begins. They merge, they absorb, they carry what is not theirs. And in doing so, they provoke unconscious hostility. For no one wishes to be unconsciously invaded, even by kindness. To help without boundaries is to enter into the psychic field of another without consent. This can feel to the unconscious like intrusion, like possession. And so hostility arises. The empath may protest, but I only meant to help. Yet the unconscious responds not to intention, but to energy. Without boundaries, the gift is felt as a violation. Thus, the empath must learn the art of separation, to love without absorbing, to help without rescuing, to mirror without becoming the mirror. This requires inner strength, the ability to hold one's own center even in the face of another's suffering. Learning boundaries is not a simple mental exercise. It is a process of discovering where your energy ends and another's begins. It is learning to feel the difference between empathy and enmeshment, between compassion and compulsion. The empath without boundaries often experiences physical symptoms when in the presence of others' pain. Headaches, exhaustion, inexplicable anxiety. These are not random. They are signals that you have taken on what is not yours to carry. The practice of boundaries begins with the body. Notice when you enter a room how your energy shifts. Notice when speaking with someone whether you feel expanded or contracted. Notice whether you leave an interaction feeling drained or enlivened. Your body knows the difference between giving from overflow and giving from depletion. Learning to trust these signals is the beginning of psychological boundaries. There is also the boundary of time. The empath often gives without limit, available at all hours, prioritizing others' crises over their own needs. This is not generosity. It is a form of self-abandonment. To honor your own rhythms, your own need for rest and restoration, is not selfishness. It is self-respect. And paradoxically, when you honor your own boundaries, you become more genuinely available to others because your presence comes from fullness rather than depletion. It requires the courage to let others struggle, to let them find their own way, to accept that not all who suffer wish to be healed. This is perhaps the hardest lesson of all, that not everyone desires your gift. And that sometimes the greatest love is to step back to honor the autonomy of the other soul, to resist the compulsion to fix or save or carry. And yet paradoxically, when the empath truly embodies this boundary, their presence becomes even more healing. For now it is free of compulsion, free of intrusion, free of the unconscious demand to be loved in return. It is simply presence, simply love, without attachment. Such presence is rare, and it is the presence of the individuated soul. It does not need anything from the other. It does not seek validation through giving. It simply is. Still, even with boundaries, hatred may come. This is inevitable, for whenever the unconscious is stirred, resistance arises. The empath must learn not to fear this resistance, not to retreat in despair, but to see it as the necessary fire of transformation. Just as the alchemist knew that the nigredo, the blackening, was necessary before the gold could be born, so too must the empath accept that hatred is often the beginning of healing, not the end. The alchemical process teaches us that transformation cannot occur without dissolution. The old form must break down completely before the new form can emerge. In psychological terms, this means that the ego structures that have kept someone safe but limited must crumble before a more authentic self can arise. The empath who triggers this process will often be blamed for the pain of dissolution, even though they are merely the catalyst, not the cause. Think of it this way. A person has lived their entire life in a prison cell. They have decorated the cell, made it comfortable, convinced themselves it is not a prison, but a home. Then you arrive and show them the door they never knew existed. Some will walk through with gratitude, but others will rage at you for destroying their carefully constructed sense of safety. They will call you cruel for showing them the door, because now they can no longer unsee it. Now they must choose, and choice is burden as much as it is freedom. Imagine a dream. A figure offers light to a blind man. The blind man recoils, shouting, striking the light bringer. Yet slowly, painfully, his eyes begin to open. This is the image of the empath's role. To be hated sometimes is to be the bearer of light that others are not yet ready to receive. The hatred is not the failure of the light. It is the resistance of eyes that have been closed for too long that must now endure the pain of opening. If you are an empath, you must carry this knowledge deep in your soul. Otherwise, the hatred you encounter will break you. You must know that you are walking an archetypal path, one that has always been marked by rejection. The prophets were stoned, the healers cast out, the mystics mocked. To expect otherwise is to misunderstand the nature of your calling. But if you accept it, if you embrace the paradox, you will discover a strength within you that cannot be shaken. For the empath's journey is not to be loved by all, but to embody truth. And truth, when spoken into the world, will always awaken both love and hate. If you can endure both without losing your center, you will have touched the self, that eternal image of wholeness that transcends every projection. We arrive now at a crucial understanding. The hatred directed toward the empath is not simply the result of projection or wounded pride. It is also a summons. It is the call of the unconscious, demanding that the empath themselves awaken. To be hated unjustly is to be thrust into the fire of individuation. It forces you to confront the ultimate question: who are you when you are no longer defined by the eyes of others? Who are you when even love given is met with scorn? This is the crucible of the empath. And it is only in this crucible that the true self is revealed. The ego longs for recognition. It wants its goodness affirmed, its sacrifices acknowledged, its love rewarded. And when this does not happen, when instead hatred and rejection come, the ego suffers. It feels betrayed, humiliated, abandoned. Yet in this very suffering lies the doorway to transformation. For the ego must die if the self is to be born. The hatred that empaths feel from those they have helped is in this sense an alchemical fire that burns away the need for external validation. It strips the empath bare, leaving them face to face with their own essence, with the eternal core that is not dependent on praise or blame. This stripping away is painful. It feels like loss, like death, like crucifixion. But it is also liberation. For once you have endured being hated for the very love you offered, you discover a freedom that cannot be shaken. You discover that your worth is not in the hands of others, that your gift does not require applause, that your love is not invalidated by rejection. You discover that the true measure of your being is not how others respond, but how deeply you remain rooted in the self. There is a story told in many traditions of the wise elder who is praised by the village one day and condemned the next. When praised, the elder simply says, "Is that so?" When condemned, the elder says again, "Is that so?" The elder's inner state does not fluctuate with the opinions of others because the elder is rooted in something unchanging, something that exists beyond the realm of projection and judgment. This is the freedom that awaits the empath who completes the journey of individuation. You may think this sounds cold, detached, as if you must become stone in order to survive. But this is not what is being asked of you. You do not become less feeling. You become more discerning about what you feel. You learn to distinguish between your emotions and the emotions of others, between your wounds and the wounds projected onto you, between true intuition and trauma response. This is not numbness. This is clarity. This is why so many mystics, prophets, and healers throughout history have walked paths marked by rejection. Their journey was not merely to heal others, but to be purified themselves, to be burned in the fire, until only the gold of the self remained. The wounded healer archetype appears again and again in mythology, precisely because it represents this essential truth that healing others and healing oneself are not separate journeys, but two movements of the same alchemical transformation. The empath too is called to this path. Not all will accept it, for it is a lonely road. But those who do will find that the hatred of others no longer wounds in the same way. It becomes instead a signpost, an initiation, a reminder that one is walking the archetypal path of the healer, the truth bearer, the mirror of shadow. You begin to understand that you have been chosen, not cursed, that your sensitivity is not weakness, but a form of sight. I say to you, do not seek to avoid this hatred. Do not waste your energy trying to make all love you, for that is a futile task and it betrays your own calling. Instead, seek to understand it. See it for what it is. A symptom of the unconscious in turmoil, a projection of shadows, a resistance to healing, a mirror of your own wounds. Accept it not as truth about you, but as part of the eternal drama of human transformation. And yet, acceptance does not mean passivity. To be an empath with awareness is not to endlessly endure abuse or to martyr yourself in toxic relationships. It is to discern. It is to know when to give and when to withhold, when to stay and when to walk away. For sometimes the most healing act is to step back to allow the other to face their own darkness without your intervention. This is not abandonment. It is respect for the autonomy of the other soul. To carry everyone's pain is not your task. Your task is to embody truth, to carry light, to mirror shadow. What others do with that is their choice, not your responsibility. There is a profound difference between compassionate presence and compulsive rescuing. One comes from the centered self. The other comes from the wounded ego seeking its own redemption. Dreams reveal this in symbolic form. There is often the dream of carrying a heavy burden, of walking with strangers upon your back, of being crushed by weight not your own. When the dreamer awakens, they realize, I have carried too much. The task of individuation is to set down what is not yours to distinguish your burden from the projections of others. Only then can you walk freely. Only then can your gift flow without the contamination of unconscious entanglement. There is another dimension that must be spoken of. Hatred can also conceal admiration. Sometimes those who despise you secretly envy your gift. They hate not you, but their own inability to embody what you embody. They resent the sensitivity they have long buried within themselves. To stand in your presence is to feel the ghost of what they once were or could have been. Their hatred is the mask worn by their unacknowledged longing. To recognize this is not to excuse cruelty, but to understand that behind hostility, there is often a cry of the soul. But do not be deceived into trying to win them over. That is the trap of the wounded empath, forever seeking to turn hatred into love, forever hoping that one more act of kindness will finally break through their defenses. No. Your task is not to transform their projection, but to remain faithful to your center. If love comes, receive it. If hatred comes, endure it. But in both, remain rooted in the self. The self, that great archetype of wholeness, is beyond the dualities of love and hate, acceptance and rejection. To touch the self is to know that you are more than the roles others assign you. You are more than rescuer, more than scapegoat, more than mirror. You are the totality of light and shadow, the union of opposites, the living image of wholeness. To realize this is the true liberation of the empath. For then you are no longer defined by how others see you. You are no longer enslaved by the demand to be loved. You can give freely without attachment. You can endure rejection without despair. You can walk your path alone if necessary, but whole. And when you reach this place, you will discover something astonishing. The hatred no longer pierces you in the same way. It becomes transparent, like smoke passing through the air. You see it for what it is: a shadow play, a projection, an archetypal drama unfolding. And instead of collapsing under its weight, you stand as witness, as participant, but no longer as victim. This does not mean you will never feel pain again. You will. To be sensitive is always to be vulnerable. But the pain will no longer define you. It will no longer break you. It will become part of the larger rhythm of your life, woven into the tapestry of your individuation. You will see that even the hatred of others has been a necessary part of your journey, shaping you, purifying you, leading you to the self. The practical application of this wisdom begins with self-knowledge. you must examine your own motivations for helping. Are you giving from a place of wholeness or from a place of wound? Are you seeking to heal others in order to avoid healing yourself? Are you unconsciously hoping that if you give enough, you will finally receive the love you were denied in childhood? These are uncomfortable questions, but they are essential. For Jung on empaths and projection teaches us that we cannot truly help others until we have faced our own shadow, until we have integrated the parts of ourselves we have denied. The empath who gives without self-knowledge is like a physician who treats others while ignoring their own illness. Eventually, the illness spreads, and the helper becomes as wounded as those they sought to help. Begin by asking yourself, what am I seeking in this dynamic? If the answer includes phrases like, to be valued, to be needed, to prove my worth, or to be loved, then you know you are operating from wound rather than wholeness. This doesn't make you bad or wrong. It makes you human. But it does mean that your giving will likely attract people who cannot truly receive, because unconsciously you are not giving in order to let go, but giving in order to hold on. But the empath who has done the inner work, who has faced their own shadow, who has integrated their own need for love and belonging, this empath can give freely. Their gift is no longer contaminated by unconscious demands. They do not need the other to validate them, to complete them, to heal them. They give from overflow, not from emptiness. And this kind of giving rarely provokes hatred, for it carries no hidden agenda, no invisible strings, no unconscious intrusion. Yet even this conscious giving may be met with resistance. For transformation is always met with resistance. The unconscious does not easily surrender its defenses. And so the empath must learn patience, must learn to trust the process, must learn to accept that healing happens in its own time, not according to our wishes. We cannot force anyone to see their shadow. We can only hold the mirror and wait. So let the hatred come if it must. Let the rejection unfold if it is part of the drama. Stand firm. Know who you are. Do not be defined by their projections. Do not lose yourself in their shadows. Remain faithful to your own soul. For in the end, it is not the love or the hatred of others that defines you. It is your fidelity to the self, your courage to embody truth, your willingness to carry the paradox of being both healer and scapegoat, both loved and hated, both rejected and whole. This is the destiny of the empath. This is the path of individuation. And though it is not easy, though it burns, it is also the path that leads to freedom. For when you can endure being hated for the love you have given, you are free. You have transcended the chains of ego, and you have touched the eternal ground of the self. Embrace the paradox. Do not flee from the mystery that love can evoke hatred, that healing can provoke hostility. For in this paradox lies the deepest truth of the psyche, of that transformation always awakens resistance, that light always casts a shadow, that wholeness is born not in the absence of conflict, but in its embrace. To be an empath is to stand in this tension, to endure the crossfire of projections, to carry both the balm and the fire. It is a heavy calling, but it is also a sacred one. And remember, you are not alone. This path has been walked by countless souls before you. The mystics, the shamans, the healers, the prophets. They too were hated by those they sought to help. They too were betrayed, mocked, crucified. But through it all, they discovered the self, the eternal core that no hatred can destroy. You walk in their footsteps. You carry the same archetypal flame. And though the world may not always thank you, though some may even despise you, the truth of your being remains. You are a carrier of light, a mirror of shadow, a catalyst of transformation. Your presence in this world matters not because of how others respond to you, but because of what you embody. You embody the possibility of wholeness, the courage to face darkness, the willingness to hold space for the shadow. When you truly understand this, when you have integrated this knowledge into the core of your being, you will no longer be shaken by the hatred of others. You will see it as part of the greater pattern part of the archetypal drama that has unfolded since the beginning of human consciousness. You will see that you are not a victim of this dynamic, but a conscious participant in it. And this changes everything. For the conscious participant is no longer at the mercy of unconscious forces. They can navigate the waters of projection with skill, can set boundaries with compassion, can give without losing themselves, can endure without being destroyed. This is the mark of the individuated soul, the one who has done the work, who has faced the fire, who has emerged with the gold of the self. Let this be your guiding star. Not the approval of others, not the gratitude of those you help, not the safety of being universally loved, but the fidelity to your own essence, the commitment to your own individuation, the courage to walk your path, even when it leads through the valley of rejection. For on the other side of that valley lies freedom, lies wholeness, lies the self. The hatred you have experienced has not been in vain. It has been your teacher, your purifier, your initiation into deeper truth. Every moment of rejection has been an opportunity to ask yourself, who am I beyond this projection? Who am I when stripped of external validation? Who am I in the eternal ground of being? And in asking these questions and living into them, you have begun the journey home to yourself. This is the ultimate gift of the empath's suffering. It is the doorway to the self. It is the fire that burns away everything false, everything dependent, everything that seeks completion in the eyes of others. What remains is pure essence, unshakable presence, love, that does not require reciprocation. This is the gold that emerges from the alchemical process, the treasure that makes the entire journey worthwhile. So walk forward, dear empath, not with the burden of needing to be understood, but with the freedom of understanding yourself. Walk forward knowing that your sensitivity is not a curse, but a calling, that your capacity to feel is not weakness, but strength, that your gift of mirroring shadow is one of the most important gifts a soul can carry in this world. Walk forward knowing that you are part of an ancient lineage of healers and truth bearers. And when the hatred comes again, as it may meet it, not with collapse or bitterness, but with the quiet strength of one who knows that the hatred is not about them, one who knows that they are walking the archetypal path, one who knows that their worth is already established in the eternal self and cannot be diminished by the projections of the wounded and the unconscious. There is a final paradox that must be spoken. The empath who no longer needs to be an empath in order to feel worthy becomes the most powerful healer of all. When your identity is no longer bound to your gift, when you can hold it lightly rather than clutching it desperately, when you can offer it freely without needing it to define you, then you have truly claimed your power. For you are no longer the wounded healer, seeking healing through others. You are the individuated soul who carries both wound and wholeness, both shadow and light, both the capacity to feel deeply and the strength to remain unshaken. This is what the world needs most. Not more people who will sacrifice themselves endlessly on the altar of others' comfort. Not more martyrs who collapse under the weight of unprocessed projection. But conscious empaths who have done the inner work, who know themselves, who can hold space for darkness without being consumed by it. Empaths who understand that their sensitivity is a form of spiritual technology, a capacity to read energy and navigate the invisible dimensions of human experience. You are needed, but not in the way you once thought. Not as the eternal rescuer, but as the conscious witness. Not as the one who carries everyone's pain, but as the one who helps others learn to carry their own. Not as the savior, but as the mirror that reflects each person back to themselves with such clarity that they cannot help but see the truth of who they are, shadow and all. This is your inheritance. This is your freedom. This is the transformation that awaits you on the other side of understanding. The Carl Jung empath who knows themselves, who has integrated their shadow, who stands rooted in the self, is one of the most powerful forces for healing in this world. Not because they rescue or fix or save, but because they embody wholeness. And wholeness, once embodied, radiates outward without effort, without demand, without the need for recognition. Be that wholeness. Be that presence. Be that light that does not fear the shadow it casts. For in being this, you fulfill your deepest calling, you honor the wounded healer archetype that lives within you, and you contribute to the healing of the collective unconscious itself. This is the path. This is the way. This is the transformation that your suffering has been preparing you for all along. The collective unconscious speaks through you. When you stand as an individuated empath rooted in the self, you become a conduit for something far larger than your personal story. You become an agent of transformation, not only for those you encounter directly, but for the invisible web of consciousness that connects all beings. Every time you hold your center in the face of projection, every time you refuse to collapse under the weight of others' shadows, every time you remain true to your essence. Despite hatred or rejection, you are performing an act of service to the collective soul of humanity. This may sound grandiose, but it is simply the truth of how the psyche works. We are not isolated individuals. We are nodes in a vast network of shared consciousness. What you integrate within yourself ripples outward. What you refuse to carry unconsciously creates space for others to face their own darkness. What you transform in your own depths contributes to the transformation of the whole. This is why your journey matters, even when it feels lonely, even when no one witnesses it, even when you are hated for the very gift you bring. If this journey has stirred something in your soul, share it with another empath who needs to hear this truth. And tell me in the comments, when did you first realize the hatred you received wasn't about you? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Together, we are walking each other home to the self.